seems like I begin every video at the minute saying it's been a tough old winter, but as the garden's thawing out from yet another freezing spell, it's definitely been a really rough time, not just for the plants, but for us exotic gardeners. And in today's video, I want to talk about 5 tips, or at least 5 groups of plants that I would use if you want to create an exotic, tropical or jungle style garden here in the UK, but don't really want all the winter faffing. You don't want the heartbreak of having plants turn brown, shrivel up and die on you. And you don't want a garden that's a source of anxiety over the winter months. You want something that you can enjoy, whether you're wanting to create a really evergreen structural garden that looks great in the middle of winter, or you want to go all out and creating a summer display. These are 5 tips, 5 areas of plants that I would use to really create that effect without as much of the worry. That's the idea anyway. Whether you want a low maintenance exotic garden that looks great in the middle of winter, or you want to add some height and some structural drama to your summer tropical display, you can't go far wrong with some hardy exotic plants. But my first tip would be, make sure that the hardy exotic that you're looking at is actually hardy in your garden and will be exotic looking in spring, not a brown straw coloured mess. Because these are the plants that can really anchor your whole garden. Personally, I see hardy exotics as the plants I base the whole garden around. These are the plants I tie the whole garden together with, the ones that I enjoy seeing with the frost on them and don't need to worry about winter protection. So 3 basics would be, if you see behind me here, Phyllostaches and Fargesia bamboos. Incredibly tough plants that see a huge amount of cold weather from. So for most UK gardens, you don't need to be worrying about them. Trachycarpus palms, Fortunii and Wagnerianus or Waggy. I've done loads of videos all about these, but very tough palms that are great to start any kind of exotic style garden with, pretty much wherever you live in the UK. But definitely, if you want to expand beyond those and look at other palms, it's worth doing a bit of research. And when it comes to shrubs, personally, I don't think you can go far wrong with Fatsia japonica. Yes, it's widely available, yes, it's reasonably common, but when you see one grown well with a bit of shade, those large, dark green, glossy leaves can look absolutely incredible. So they definitely deserve a place in any kind of exotic or jungle themed garden. But if you want to look beyond these plants, I think that's where a bit of research comes in, especially if you're new to this style of gardening. Because those plants that you're looking at that cost hundreds of pounds might not necessarily be hardy for you just because they're called hardy plants. A hardy palm doesn't mean it's hardy for someone who lives in Cornwall, as well as someone who maybe lives in Newcastle or further north than that. So I think it's incredibly important to do, firstly, join the Facebook groups like Tropical Style Gardening, Hardy Tropicals, and see actual relevant experience with people in your area. Let other people tell you about their experiences with a certain plant or palm, look at the successes and also look at the failures. Because you might find out that in theory, a palm like a Boutia should be tough and hardy for you, but in reality, people actually struggle with it, and there simply isn't enough summer heat to actually outgrow any damage that happens. And also, I think it's really important to not just do that, but actually be aware of the temperatures that your area has seen this winter. It has been a colder winter, there's been a few really cold spells. It's important to look at other people's gardens in your area and see what they're actually growing. If they're growing big cordylines and there's no damage whatsoever, then you can crack on and grow some cordylines yourself. But if other people's look really damaged, if they're brown and burnt down to the ground, then I would probably use that as a bit of an idea as to what you should grow in your garden. So I guess in summary, really, if you are going to grow a hardy exotic in your garden, and if it's not something that you're actually widely knowledgeable about, definitely do a little bit of research and check that it's a proven tough plant for your area. And that's a great way of not having to worry about any kind of winter protection. My second tip then, and this is just a tip, not a definite this is how you must grow your garden, is don't fall into the collecting trap. In this day and age of Facebook posts and being spammed with different people showing off their plants, it's easy to fall into the trap of assuming that just because someone else is growing something or they bought it means it's a viable choice for you. And when a lot of these specimen plants can cost hundreds of pounds, it's definitely something you want to do your research about and make sure they are a viable option. And I think when you start growing certain kinds of plants, it's really easy to get carried away into just expanding and thinking I can grow that one, that one, that one. Start collecting them all like the Pokemon cards. You don't want to do that. For example, Schefflera. You've got Taiwaniana, Rhododendrofolia, Delave, which are considered reasonably tough. And then there's other varieties that definitely don't have the same hardiness. But here, this winter, Even a lot of my Taiwaniana have really struggled, and there's only really rhododendrofolia, which I would say looks blemish free. So it's important to, before you start getting carried away, literally getting every single kind of a plant, whether it's a palm, whether it's some unusual shrub, to actually consider, are these plants hardy in my garden? And if not, am I prepared to protect them, or am I simply taking that risk? Because otherwise, before you know it, half your garden's full of exotic and unusual shrubs from all around the world, and they can't take a cold winter here in the UK. So I think before you buy, or before you spend a huge amount of money on a selection of unusual shrubs or a massive palm that you haven't even heard of before, just consider again, is it right for your garden, and how much cold can it actually take? If it does need protection, are you actually going to give it that protection? Or is it simply something you want just to tick it off your list? I think it's important to be honest with yourself, no matter how painful that is. Next up then, you don't accidentally want to become an exotic garden snob. And by that I mean, if you want to create a tropical, exotic or jungle look, not every single plant in your garden has to be an exotic, some rarity from the other side of the world. There's so many complementary plants you can grow in your garden that look great alongside these specimen exotics, but don't have any winter worries at all. Whatever the style of your garden, you can have plants in there that you don't need to worry about. And anyone who comes looking at your garden in summer, they'll never know what really is a truly tender exotic. They won't know what you need to wrap in winter, and they won't know what simply grows away, does its thing, and comes back every single spring. So as much as it's cool to look forward to a summer garden where every single plant is an exotic really doing its thing, when it comes to winter, it is reassuring to know that a good chunk of your garden are simply plants that you don't need to do anything to, just leave them in the ground and they'll come back again in spring. And I think whatever style of garden, there's plenty of really easy growing choices that you can grow that can really add to the theme. For example, if you've got a shady or woodland style garden, some trachycarpus will look great, but around those maybe ferns, hostas, rhodiosia, with some really big unusual leaves, different styles of foliage, they'll definitely add to the tropical look. I think a lot of perennials, when you combine and grow them in the right way, can really have that exotic tropical vibe, again without any of the winter woes. And when it comes to maybe sunnier, well-drained gardens, potentially trying to create an arid desert or Mediterranean theme, there's euphorbias, eucalyptus trees, there's all kinds of different sedums. There's a lot of really striking plants that can thrive in those conditions, and again, don't have any winter worries at all. And I suppose when you look at a more general tropical themed garden, really the limit is your imagination. Just when you look at grasses, for example, there's Hakanakloa macra, the Japanese forest grass, perfect for a shady spot. And then you've got the big miscanthus grasses, which definitely add as much drama and impact as a lot of these more tender exotics, but without any of the reliability issues. They simply come back from whatever cold the winter throws at them. So I think it's really important to consider these other plants, not just be so blinkered looking at every single plant being an exotic. It's all about the overall effect. And if you can provide that effect with a good chunk of the plants being perfectly tough, perfectly hardy, unquestionably so, then you should definitely do it for an easier life. When it comes to the summer months though, personally, I think a lot of the hardy exotics like these palms, they disappear into the background. They're merely secondary players to the real stars of the show. And then it's all about the big leaves. But that's where things can get a bit tricky when it comes to winter. Because in colder areas, or during colder winters like this one, musa basjoo and tetrapanax, particularly younger ones, can be cut down to the ground. And it's all right saying they'll come back from the roots or sprout from lower down the stem, but if you want that big plant, it can be frustrating. And especially if you've just planted them as young plants last year, for this kind of cold to hit them, they're really going to struggle with it. That's not ideal. So if you want a garden packed full of lush foliage, huge leaves, there is a way you can do it without any of the winter worries. And personally, I would say look to the cannas and look to the gingers, but don't leave them in the ground, lift them. Now, it does take a bit of work, maybe a day either side of winter, but once it's done, it's done. And here, I simply dig up a lot of my more unusual cannas around sort of November time, before the first real cold, but a few frosts don't really matter too much. I dig up the cannas, dig up the gingers, put them in some pots, and then just move the polytunnel. So you can have a polytunnel, greenhouse, potentially even a shed or garage. and you just put them in there, leave them, don't let them completely dry out. But then when it comes to spring, late springtime, you can get them started off again and plant them out. And that way you can have so much foliage without worrying about it in winter. You're not having to spend loads on new plants every spring. And in fact, around now is when I divide lots of my cannas and gingers, so I'll get even more plants every single year. Ultimately, cannas like musifolia look incredibly similar to musa basjoo and the other bananas we can grow here, and the growth rate matches them as well. And then when it comes to the Hedychium gingers, they're primarily grown for their amazing flowers, but the foliage looks as exotic as a lot of exotic foliage plants do anyway. So really, I think if you do want to have that summer garden, but don't want to worry in winter, it's a lot easier to have a solution that you can just dig these plants up, move them somewhere safe, and then bring them out again. You're not having to worry about protecting something with fleece, taking the fleece off, putting it back on again. It's simply at the end of the season and then at the beginning, job done, no messing around. If I lived somewhere a bit colder or wanted that big leaf tropical display without having to worry about what the temperature's doing outside or wrapping plants up, well, that's the way that I would do it. Just treat the plants like dahlias will be traditionally. Lift them before the first real cold and then grow them on in spring before planting them out just after the frosts have finished, and you can't go far wrong. That way you can have the whole tropical vibe without worrying about winter. But if you want to take things a step further, or you simply haven't got anywhere to store plants like cannas over winter, then you can grow annuals. Annuals would be my tip number 5. There's so many plants that you can grow from seed that can add so much to your tropical, exotic or jungle display, really without needing to worry about winter at all. Because these plants simply grow from seed, do the thing, and then they're composted before winter even comes. You can dig them into your garden, put them in your compost bin, whatever you want with them. For example, ricinus, you can grow ricinus from seed. I've done a video all about this. They have that same Techpanax look and then get to 3 meters tall in a single season, which really is incredible. But then there's more colourful varieties like coleus you can try growing. You can even mix in vegetables. Sweet corn looks great in a tropical style garden. Really, the options are endless. And personally, one of my favourites has to be nasturtiums. I simply direct sow them into the ground in May, into any gaps of soil, and they just weave around, do the thing. Lovely foliage, looks great when the rain falls on it, and then you've got those bright bursts of colour in the flowers too. If I wanted to capture the feeling of a tropical display without worrying about winter, without having the space to store a lot of plants, and also without spending huge amounts of money, then I definitely would base it on a lot of annuals. Sure, your garden might look a little bit bare in winter, but at least you're not worrying about it. And then when summer comes, you can have a vibrant, lush display, absolutely bursting with growth, and all for the cost of just a few packets of seeds. So that's just a few thoughts on how I would create a tropical or jungle themed garden if I didn't want to worry about winter. And I know a lot of you watching this will be like myself, not afraid of having to run out on a dark, cold night, wrapping plants with fleece. You enjoy pushing the boundaries of what's possible in this country, growing the rare, the unusual, the unlikely. But I also know a lot of you simply want this kind of effect on the budget without needing to worry about wrapping plants up in fleece and all that faffing around. So that's just a few thoughts on how I would get there. So essentially, simply put, the plants that stay in your garden all year long, the plants you want to look at in winter, they want to be tough and hardy for your garden. And then when it comes to summer, I would certainly think outside the box. Just because everyone on Facebook's grown a Techpanax or a musa basjoo banana doesn't mean that you have to in your garden. With miscanthus and a few seed-grown ricinus, you can have exactly the same kind of effect, but from a packet without any kind of winter problems at all. Let me know in the comments below if the cold we've seen this winter has changed your approach to tropical style gardening. Has it affected the plants you might be buying in spring? Will it change your garden completely? Let me know, because I really am intrigued. But for everyone else, thank you very much for watching. I'll see you in the next video. See you later.